easier said than done many times, but I think that that's key in relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship, a business colleague, or a friend. Like, how can we work together to bring our best selves forward?
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And I've been waiting all day to say this, like what to do when Mercury is in retrograde. When Mercury is in retrograde, we do not want to have Dr. Cyrina Bullard on the show because something happens when Mercury goes in retrograde and the gravitational pull is happening around her electronic field. And we had some problems, but you know what? You know what's the beauty of it? Is we solve big problems. And we solved those problems and got us all here together today. We're all well hydrated, out of the sun, even though it looks like the sun's shining on me, but that's just how the office is, the studio. And Cam, you're dressed like it's wintertime, wearing long sleeves down there in Arizona. What's going on down there?
I see. I don't like this because normally you make fun of me because you joke that I look like the desert entrepreneur. Because for like 3 years now, I've been doing the one roll in the sleeve. The real secret there, folks, if you're tall, you can buy normal shirts then, and I can roll it up, and it doesn't look like they're too small for me. But I'm in shorts. I'm rocking the flip flops. I don't know what you're talking about. It's hot as heck down here. I'm too busy trying not to look at the shed that I'm going to go build at about 3:00 this afternoon.
There you go. There's the distraction when the project is sitting right outside the office.
Literally right there. Yep.
that is even though Liz Rutledge, if you ain't looked at us on YouTube, you need to go on YouTube and see that we've got Dr. Cyrina and Miss Liz joining us today, sitting next to each other in the same location. Yes, folks, they aren't the same person. And they are sitting there together. And Liz just led us through a little bit of a 1-minute mindfulness breathing right before we hit record. So thank you for that, Liz.
My pleasure.
Based on what Camden just said, we probably should have done about 15 or 20 minutes. And maybe that shed would have materialized and done something different. I don't know.
Maybe. I think, honestly, I'll say I think I need a little bit of, exposure therapy when it comes to the shed. I got to look at the shed because the shed needs to wait, and that's okay, right? The shed will be done when the shed is done, and I need to be comfortable looking at it. I can't avoid the problem. Come on, Dad.
and the irony, boy, I got to get us going on this, but the irony is that for those of you who have gone through our leadership development system, you'll also know that Camden is putting the practical exercise of the leadership development system to practicality, because the practical exercise of the leadership development system is building a tool shed and how to solve that. So he is validating the assumptions that we've made in that practical exercise. And speaking of assumptions, the assumption being that Cyrina and Liz, y'all got something to say, so I should ask you questions before I continue to ramble on today. So, Cyrina, what jumps out at me, because I always love looking at people's bio and what they've done, but I think pharmaceuticals, very hard science, very, counting the pills sort of thing. And I know there's more to it than that.
Much more, yeah.
But how did that very methodical, very hard science, I'll stick with that theory, translate into this touchy-feely happiness?
Well, it's interesting because honestly, the science behind happiness is proven, and we need to be proactive in our lives. And what happened was in 2010, I had a really bad bicycle accident. I was in a coma for 18 days, hospital 2.5 months, out of work for 9.5 months. And they told my mother she was going to take care of me for the rest of my life. I went through tons of rehab, went back to work as a pharmacist for 5 years, then had a second brain injury. So I was laying in bed thinking, okay, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And this idea came to my mind, catch happiness. And I'm like, okay, this life is so short. You never know. We want to make sure that we encourage people to take advantage of their day, because we don't know if we're going to have another one. You know, I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I couldn't feed myself when I had the bike accident. And you never know. And these are all gifts that are given to us. And what are we going to do with them? And so, but as far as the hard science, there is a lot of science behind what we teach. And we're very conscious of having, tools to help people live a better life, to be more mindful, to be happier and more resilient, because we all need to be resilient in life, because there's different challenges that we know that come up in life, you don't expect. But you're like, okay, this happened. How can I move forward?
And I think it was,
thinking about the happiness, one thing that I just wanted to ask on that I always find very interesting. I went through a similar kind of process. It's one of the soft sciences, but in economics, of like, you got to go through it on this like psychological, behavioral, personal level. There's things that you can understand a lot of times. Like, oh, okay, if you do this, person will do this and that kind of stuff. And then every time you try to take that and put it anywhere else or apply it to a group of people, nothing really works. Like the science just kind of falls apart. It's, I always joke about on the show of like connecting the theory to the reality, right? Could you talk a little bit about what that experience, I would imagine it's kind of a similar thing. Like happiness is a kind of difficult thing to measure. It's, that maybe quantifying it and the mechanisms to help it can be kind of tricky like that, and just trying to connect the theory there. Could you talk a little bit about like what that process is like?
Right. Well, I'm trained by Yale and by Berkeley in the science of happiness and the science of well-being. And I think we're all different human beings, as we know, and different things. What makes you happy may not make me happy, and vice versa. So we need to be individualized as far as what is it that brings me happiness, and be conscious of that. A lot of people don't even think about that. Like whether it's having a cup of coffee with your partner or going for a walk or whatever it is, and be intentional about putting those things in your day, because things aren't just going to happen. Your day gets so busy and you're like, oh gosh, I forgot to do this. You can take 5 minutes out of your day and do whatever, do a little silly dance party, be a little, have fun, laugh with your children,
watch cat videos.
Whatever makes you happy. Because I can't choose that for you, but only, and you've got to be the proactive person to put that into your life, and it's, and I feel like as far as, yes, some people may not be open to it because they think it's woo-woo, but it's your life. You decide what you want to do with it. But we know that people who are happier, they're more productive, they're more creative, they have better physical and mental health, and it's just like, we've got to be proactive, because the world can be really depressing sometimes, as we all know.
It's not getting less stressful.
Yeah. And so it's just like, we have to be proactive members of our own lives, because we can't control what other people do. We can only control what we do.
And one thing that Cyrina shared with me, like early on when we first started to get to know each other, and she was a pharmacist, so she had that medical background. And when she started exploring the science of happiness, she approached it from a very scientific perspective. And there's a lot of data out there now. And I think they started studying meditation in like the 70s and kind of started removing some of the woo-woo-ness and started bringing in some of the neuroscience and how it can benefit our brains and stuff. So
yeah, it's fascinating, because after my second brain injury, I was very conscious of what can I do to increase my brain health. And meditation was one of them, because you increase what's called BDNF, your brain-derived neurotropic factor. And that allows there to be more synaptic connections. And so does exercise and many other things that, we don't learn about in pharmacy school. It's like, why didn't I learn about it? Because there's science behind it, And I'm like, these are things that we can do that don't cost money and don't have side effects,
So. Oh, the side effect might make you happier.
It's so funny. I've got to throw this out there because it just occurred to me. I feel like one of the things that makes it, because it feels a little woo-woo to start with, but there is the real science behind, like you talk about. And I think the issue is the brain stuff feels like magic still to me. like you said BDNF, and I was like, that's what.
Not the train.
My brain was just immediately like, that's just okay. So there's brain waves, and it's like it feels too magic to us. I think the brain is such a hard thing to wrap our heads around that it almost forces us to put it in that woo woo bucket, because otherwise I have to understand neuroscience, and like that's a big ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we now know too. There's parts of the brain called the reticular activating system that your thoughts can impact your life. And, what you think about, like, let's say you think, oh, I want to buy this car. And you see this car everywhere. I'm like, why is that? Because that's what you're focused on. And the reticular activating system, I like to call it like the bouncer of the brain, because we get so much stimuli every day. But what we're focused on, we'll see more opportunities and more things in our lives that are like, oh, this might be a great person to talk to, or this might be a good event to go to. We'll be more conscious of it.
At Drive and Purpose, we call that the red pickup truck syndrome, because you never saw that red pickup truck until the day you decided you wanted to buy one. And yes, the science of it is the reticulated activating system, the survival instinct in our brain that finds what we need to survive and want.
Yeah.
And Liz, because you're more, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're kind of coming more from the touchy-feely, artsy sort of side in this, and now you got the partner over here is like, no, science. How is that adjustment in helping you with the personal experience and people you've worked with over the years? But how is that? Is Cyrina coming in with here's the data, helped you understand it better?
Well, I think it just was very validating, right? Because, if you talk about this, so I grew up with the woo-woo weird stuff that is now being a lot more accepted. Oprah's talking about it, and people that, have a little bit more of a voice or speaking about it. But I think it was in the 70s they started really researching the effects of mindfulness meditation on the brains and on how we can measure an increase in focus. We can measure a decrease in anxiety and stress with MRIs and EEGs and all kinds of medical equipment. So that's kind of cool because it's very validating. But if I can just share a little bit of my background, my grandmother's mother was into Ernest Holmes and the Science of Mind. So if you look that up, it's very much like what Louise Hay studied under Ernest Holmes. And so it's sort of that reticular activating system that then, it's like the law of attraction is another way of saying, like, you kind of end up attracting what you focus on. So we need to be really careful about what we're spending a lot of time focusing on and thinking about. But I grew up with parents who were like, oh, you fell down and hurt yourself. Can you imagine that owie, that pain, like an ice cube melting, and breathe through it? And the first time I had a panic attack, I was like 9. And my dad, I was like literally grabbing his car keys going, you need to take me to the hospital because I'm dying. I woke up, I must have had a bad dream or something. And I woke up with like feeling like I was having a heart attack. And he had me go back inside and lay down on my bed and look at my belly rise and fall, and calmed down that panic attack. That's the first time I remember really using what I would now call mindfulness meditative breath, where you're focusing on right here, right now, and also consciously slowing down your breathing. So essentially you're telling your mind, your body is telling your mind you're okay. So calm down, And I grew up with that and didn't think anything of it until our oldest was 12. And I heard about a friend of hers brother who took his own life at the age of 14. And I went, what are you talking about? Like, how do kids this age know how to even do that? And now we're hearing about children as young as 6 attempting to take their own lives. And it's just tragic. And the level of anxiety is through the roof for 5-year-olds, which is also just tragic. So I went to the school, and this is like 12 years ago. And now I regularly teach children as young as age 3 how to get in touch with their nervous systems and be able to go, I'm okay. Right here, right now, I'm okay. There's a lot of scary out in the world and people are mean, but I'm okay. And if I can realize that about myself, I'm going to think more clearly. I'm going to be a better person in the world. I'm going to show up better. And it's something. It's maybe not the cure, but it's something. So yeah.
I'd be curious, talking about the focus aspect there, and kind of going back to, my first question to you, Cyrina, about, the fact that the brain stuff sounds so crazy, it makes it kind of hard for us to apply sometimes. I think that's where the more the artsy, the more woo-woo, whatever you want to call it, coming from that other end of the spectrum can be helpful. Even you just talking about watching your belly go up and down. If I went to a doctor, they were like, yeah, just next time you're freaking out, just watch your belly go up and down. I'm like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But you need those weirder examples or more artistic ways of thinking about it, is the other way I keep coming back to it, in order to help explain this thing that's hard to understand, which is the brain science of it. Could you talk a little bit about kind of how you look to connect those two dots and find ways to describe these things that are so hard to wrap our heads around in ways that people can actually apply it like that, like you're talking about?
Well, I'll share with you, it's interesting because we know when we're stressed, we increase our cortisol levels, right? When we increase our cortisol levels, we have decreased blood flow to our prefrontal cortex region of our brain, our logical area of the brain, where we make decisions. And when we're stressed, we're making more emotional decisions, not logical decisions many times. And I like to call that the amygdala hijack, because it's like we're being all emotional when we're not making the logical sense when we're stressed. So before we all have people that stress us out and push our buttons. And I'm what's called, I'm a HeartMath certified coach and trainer, and their definition of resilience is the capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of stress, challenges, and adversities. So when we know we're going to have an interaction with somebody that's kind of push our buttons, we can prepare for that beforehand to bring our best selves forward, because we don't want to react. We want to be able to respond. And, when we've had a stressful day, we can do simple breathing exercises on the way home in the car, both hands on the wheel, eyes open. We don't need to close our eyes, but being conscious of our breaths, and making sure that we're hitting the reset button before we come home and be with our partners or our, family, because if you're stressed out, that can impact the rest of your day, and it's like, how can we hit the reset button? Because it's easy to stay in the spiral of being stressed out. But we have the ability to say, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm going to hit the reset, and I'm going to bring my best self forward, whether it's you're meeting somebody else or a friend or family member.
Yeah. Well, I would just add on to that, HeartMath has 25 or 30 plus years of verifiable data around all this. So you can throw all that at people who don't necessarily get it. But what I feel is if you can have people experience the shift, like we did before you hit record on this conversation today, if you can feel the drop in your body, you can feel all the stress just fade away. I think that's more valuable than any charts or data or white papers or anything else, if you can feel it in your own body. And also just my sister likes to say, stay in neutral, right? Stay in neutral. Cause we can choose to go, okay, that was triggering, but can I take a step back and like she said, like Cyrina said, think before I respond, before I take action, whatever else. Imagine what's possible for the world if everyone was able to do that. It's pretty amazing, really.
Yeah, it is. And that breath pause. And I was, as you were talking about it, it just reminded me, I started doing it a while back in the meditation thing, because I was a woo-woo believer at the time, and understood and adopted it in a different reason it was training for my mind and focusing my mind to focus. But one of the things that I hadn't really thought about, and I don't think I had ever heard about it as an operator, and never heard it talked about this way, is how the breath does that. Because what we would do before we're squeezing the trigger and all that training and all that stress is you would take a breath and then you'd let half of that breath out and then you would squeeze the trigger. Not would, I still do. And it's just an interesting tie that physical thing that was taught to me as an 18-year-old soldier shooting, learning to shoot the proper military way. is what you're talking about and how it changes your mind. And it's just an interesting thing. I don't know. I personally never put those two together in that sense. I've always just, well, that's just part of shooting, but it's not. It's more than that. And that's kind of a cool little nugget of plug for that breath control and how much of a difference it makes in your life.
It shows, it really shows the impact. I think that kind of gets to what we were talking about there, which is that these things, they are very real. And it's just like trying to figure out how to get people to take that step of trying it. And you almost need these different ways of putting it, of talking about, like what you're talking about there, Dad, is this very like mechanical, like, hey, this is how you do it so you can shoot better and shoot straight. And it's like, okay, here's this very mechanical thing, but you're seeing that effect. And so I think that's what's so interesting. Makes me think back to Stephen Dubner with Freakonomics. I always think this with him, that it's like he's an economist and has that background, but he's really just a really freaking good talker. And by having that, he's able to pull people in there. And I think that's where the value, kind of like I was asking you, Liz, is of like being able to communicate that and almost draw those analogies and those metaphors and those different things just to get people to kind of take that first step with it. I think it's such an interesting aspect there. Did you have a follow-up question on that, Dad? Because otherwise I've got a gear shift. Okay. So one of the things that I really was excited to talk with y'all about today, and it's one of those going back to the Mercury retrograde. It is fate, because I probably wouldn't have asked this question the first time we were supposed to talk. But I've come to this interesting kind of dilemma with some of my coaching clients, talking about the idea of, you want to measure things inside your life because you're measuring something, then you're going to pay attention to it, and then you can help to improve it and, make those positive changes, fix your habits, those kind of little things like that. But then there's kind of this underlying question. It's almost like the extreme of that, which is, how often should you really be asking yourself if you're happy? Is there a point to be every single day being like, am I happy? And then if you're thinking that too much, you're going to see the gap all the time. Whereas, just as an arbitrary number, once a month, you're like, hey, am I happy? It's like you're looking at the full month rather than just this moment right now. And there's this kind of interesting thing at play there where it's clearly very important. The more attention you pay to it, the more attention you're going to give it, and, the better outcomes you're going to get, of course. But then also it almost exposes you to that gap at the same time. So, Cyrina, I'd be really curious, what are your thoughts on that? Even just to ask it as the blunt question, how often should you ask yourself if you're happy?
Well, I don't know that I think that you need to ask yourself that question all the time. What I do think, though, is that you need to dedicate some time to invest in yourself and make a list of things that do bring you happiness. And maybe, we all change and reevaluate that for our lives. And maybe it be a yearly thing. Like, okay, what did I do this year that really brought me happiness? Or what is it that I can introduce into my daily life that brings me happiness? I think it's more of a, not necessarily am I happy question, but what can I do to bring more happiness? How can I elevate my life? Because we all have a status quo. And, we now know, like, Sonia Lubomirsky, she's a professor in California, and she does study about happiness. And she said 50% of our happiness is due to our genetics, right? Some people are just happier people, period. And some people aren't. And so, but 10%, she says, is due to our circumstances, our finances, or this, that, our relationships, which I kind of like, if you're in a toxic relationship, I think that would be a larger percentage than just 10%. But 40% of our happiness is due to our thoughts and actions. What do we think and what do we do? And we can be proactive to bring more happiness to our lives. But I don't think it's necessarily, maybe once a year I would ask myself, am I happy? What did this year bring me? And being more proactive about what it is that brings me happiness and introducing that into my day. Every day. Because I think that, we're the directors of our lives, and you get to call what you're going to do in your day. And, I actually wanted to go back to what you were talking about, because HeartMath has partnered with the military, and they work with people with post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as other things to help them, serve our country better. And thank you for your service, by the way. I really am grateful for our freedom. And so it is adopted by the military too, and as far as these techniques. But to answer the question, Cameron, I would say I would just ask myself once a year and evaluate what can I add or detract, because there's things in our lives too that are toxic that we need to say, I don't need this in my life anymore. Or,
making choices. And I would just add on to that beyond the happiness, because true sustainable happiness, our business is sustainable happiness together, but true sustainable, like constant sustainable happiness isn't a thing, right? Yeah. We need the ebbs and flows, the highs, the lows, the contrasts in life to experience a rich, full life experience. But so for myself, like I grew up with a very stressful household growing up, to add on to what Cyrina was saying. My mother's father, I mean, there's a long story of why, but he was an abusive alcoholic. So my mother was very anxious, and, and it like cascades down until somebody chooses to do something different generationally. So, what you have, there's a lot that comes from our genetics and our mother and father, whatever. But for me, what's worked consistently is every morning I get up and I meditate for 10 to 20 minutes. I just take like non-negotiable, get up and do it. On the days that I have to rush out and miss it, something happens that throws me off my kilter. And then at the end of the day, so it's like starting your day with intention. And then at the end of the day, as a family, we have 3 kids, and they're all at home for some reason, even though they're all grown but not flown. We all sit and have dinner together.
That's a whole nother show we could talk about.
That's a whole nother show. But we start each meal with like, well, what are you grateful for? And we go round robin before the food gets cold and just say one thing. And it just kind of elevates everybody. So we're kind of all functioning on the same plane, because maybe one person had a horrible day and one person had a great day, but we all kind of get to this state of gratitude before we eat our meal. And then, just reflecting on the day can be really powerful. And also just like if you're feeling really low, and you're maybe feeling that, like, am I happy or not? You can actually, make a list of like 5 to 10 things that you're thankful for. And that gratitude just lifts your awareness, like how very lucky we are. And, even people that have lost a leg or an arm or an eye or, are sick or whatever, have something that they can be grateful for every day. Right. So anyway.
Yeah, there's so much truth to that perspective. And that was one of the things that I'd like for you to talk a bit more about, because you touched on this, Liz, is kind of the peaks and the valleys. Are you happy all the time?
No.
No. But there's some movement, and I'd just love for you to share a bit more about that perspective adjustment, that measurement, however you want to put it, in that we're the woohoo, we're not all skipping through the flowers and unicorns with rainbows every day. There's other things going on in reality. So could you talk some about that, Liz?
I would actually really love to share a very recent example. So I recently had the gift of traveling through Europe with our youngest, who just graduated from high school. And she's an artist. And she was like, Mom, I want to hear you speak Italian, because I used to be fluent in Italian 31 years ago. And so then I'm on Duolingo, like frantically trying to remember whatever. But I just 16 days in hot as heck Europe, 99 degrees Fahrenheit with 86% humidity, and tourists and trains and planes and all the things, all the normal stresses. And I think I spent like 20 hours planning this trip, figuring out all the logistics and booking hotels. And of course, some things happened. One example was we were standing on track 6 for the train in Bologna. And then we hear this announcement saying that the train was leaving on track 6, and we're standing there going, where's the train? Well, we were on the wrong track 6. We were on track 6 West or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I go to the office and I'm standing there, and I had spent so much time planning so it would go smoothly. I felt the tears coming. And this is what happens, right? So Cyrina was talking about the increase in cortisol. Well, sometimes that builds up as manganese in our bodies. And I allowed myself to cry. And 3 times on our trip, my 18-year-old daughter got to see her mom cry, because that's one of my tools. And I allow the tears to come. I release that manganese. I take some deep breaths, and I pull up my big girl panties, and I get back on, and I figured out the next train. Like we figured out the next train, and the rest of the trip went great until they lost our luggage in Lyon or wherever we were, that we didn't have suitcases for 4 days. So imagine a teenage girl without her makeup and all the things for 4 days. And you know what? It was some great memories we made, wrapped in a towel while we're washing the only clothes that we have and sharing a toothbrush and all kinds of stuff, like learning to pivot, be resilient in the moment. And I know that that's like nothing compared to what a lot of people go through. But the thing I'm super proud of is that my daughter got to witness, because of course all my kids are like, meditation doesn't work for me, but they do actually meditate in their own ways and in their own situations. But our daughter being able to see me real time use the tools that I teach, and one of which is crying, and I do a whole presentation on that, and how it's okay to cry, and you actually should cry and release that pent up stress occasionally, or go and punch a boxing bag or a punching bag or whatever, go for a run or take a bath, or but to have tools beyond just the breath. And beyond like turning on music and dancing or whatever, watching cat videos, whatever it is that brings you happiness, having tools and techniques to just rebalance, recenter, and like to your point of like waiting to pull the trigger till you're right in that moment of now. And then now I talk about with the kids that I teach, like it's so fleeting, but when you feel it, it feels like that drop when you're falling asleep. Like you find it and then it's gone. But if you can find it more and more and more, you can experience more happiness overall, I would say. And at the end of that year, when you're doing your assessment, I suspect you'll be like, you know what? They lost our luggage and that sucked. And we actually had a really great time. Do you know what I mean? You come out of it going. Anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
It's like fresh because I just got back a few days ago.
I love that. Actually, it brings another question. So I got to go 2 in a row here, Dad, because I want to make sure I ask the vacation question while we're around there. But to kind of wrap up the conversation around, are you happy? Should you ask yourself if you're happy? Those kind of things. The thing that comes to mind is I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about balance. And we kind of came to a point in the conversation, because he's a coach as well. And what he said, where we kind of came to the conclusion together, was that balance only exists in the macro. That it's like where you stress yourself out is when you try to balance in the micro. Because in the micro, you need to focus. You need to have your one main thing. You need to have your priorities. And that every time you try to measure your balance while you're in the micro, it's going to stress you out a lot. And I wonder if almost happiness is the same kind of thing like that. Like when you're right in it, when I'm out there coaching rugby, yelling at kids, I don't need to go, am I happy right now? It's like that's a much better thing to do when I'm stepped away from it. And I just kind of want to hear any of the thoughts y'all had on that, of kind of the macro, micro aspect of it.
Yeah, I would think that, being present is a huge gift to yourself too. I mean, because so many times we're thinking about, they say the past is history, the future is a mystery, but the moment is a present. And I think that many times, especially after my third brush with death, I became very conscious about that, because we worry, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to, do this or whatever it is, or you've got to pay for a new car, you got to do this, whatever stressors you have in your life. But is it really serving you to worry about things and to be more present? I think that is key, because you can't, like you said, Camden or Cam, when you're out there with the kids, you're present with them, you're coaching them, they're feeling your energy. And I think, we all put out a certain amount of energy, and people can feel that. You walk into a room and you're like, oh, it feels so fun in here. And there's times you're like, what just happened in here too? Because you can feel that energy, that negative or positive energy. But I think being present where you are, people know that, hey, they're with me. We're connecting. We're having this time together. That I think so many people forget. Like I wrote about this in my book. It makes me so sad to see families out to dinner, all texting on their phones. I'm like, they're together. Just be present. Have fun and like talk about what happened in your day. I don't get it. It makes me sad to see that.
So the other question I alluded to, Liz, talking about your vacation made me think something interesting that I heard. And I think it's an really interesting piece of wisdom. And I think a lot of these things are very interesting in how you choose to apply them. And it's the idea of, well, what's the best vacation? It's always the next one. Because when we're planning something, we have the ideals in mind, and like all that kind of stuff. And then once you actually go through it, you lose the luggage or you go through those kind of things. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Liz, of like that little bit of wisdom. Because I think there's a lot of truth to it, but that doesn't mean you just need to be sitting on a beach somewhere fantasizing about your trip to Europe. You should probably be enjoying the beach too, kind of balancing that with being present in the moment. What are your thoughts on that, Liz?
Well, I'm going to paraphrase my father, who is, as we speak, in the hospital again. He said part of the reason we were able to afford this trip to Europe is because he's realized that he's not able to travel anymore. And he always thought he would one day. And he was saving up all these airline miles and he was saving all this money. And he gave my sister and I a gift, below the tax level or whatever, so that we could start really living our lives. And he said, spend the money, go on the trip before the cancer comes or your parts start falling off, is essentially. And that's a horrible way to say it. But when we went on this trip, my daughter and I, first of all, as a family of 5, it was so refreshing to be just with one other person. But also just, we did things like we went to Harrods and had tea, and we just mindfully enjoyed the sandwiches and sipped the tea and enjoyed the sunshine and just drank in the moment, and same in St. Marco's Square in Venice. It was expensive, but we had the Aperol spritzes and snacks, and there was a quartet playing music, and there was a couple that got up and started dancing. And it was just talking about being present, I'm getting chills sharing this. I feel like maybe this is what you want to hear. Drinking in the moments while you're there,
It's a magical,
wherever you are, and just having gratitude for I am so thankful that I'm above ground breathing, and vertical, and then just able to appreciate the sunshine, the green leaves, or the music that's playing. And when we're in that state, speaking of the reticular activating system, when we're seeking more of the joy in the moment, we experience more joy overall.
Yeah, be in more flow. And I do think there's many magical moments that we are able to experience if we are present. And like you said, just sitting in St. Marco's Square with the beautiful, experience that you had there. I think that those are key things to remember. We're here.
Being so grateful for the experience. I want to share one thing, because you have young kids, right, Cam? Really young kid?
I have my first one on the way, which is actually, I think that's the announcement on the podcast.
Exciting!
Very, very eventful moment, actually.
I want to share.
Thank you. Yeah, baby girl due in November.
Oh,
congratulations!
That's so exciting.
Thank you.
I want to share something with you that I didn't know when I was raising my 3 little kids. When they're fussing, when they're having, and this will be after they can speak, but if they're having a fit or they're upset for some reason, draw them in close, get down at their level and say, what do you need? Because oftentimes what will come out of that is they're hungry, they're tired, they're thirsty, they're hot, they have a problem that they need to solve, and they're just emoting because they don't know how to express that. And I wish I knew that when my kids were little, to just be and maybe it'll work with adults too, right? What do you need? Do you need a coffee? Do you need a hug? Do you need a whiskey, right, Otis? Do you need to go a double and a single and one, a triple? But yeah, do you need to just chill in front of the TV? Do you need to meditate? Do you need to go for a run? Do you need to take a nap? Do you need, and if we could all be a little more compassionate to each other, I think that would be super helpful. But that was something I just recently heard that I thought, it's really great advice for life. What do you need?
I think joking about or half joking, about it's does that work on adults too? It does. It's I feel like there's this joke, and I'm going to put it into the gendered stereotypes because it's easier for it. But of the husband wanting to solve the wife's problem, and it's well, you got to do this, It's no, I just want you to listen. And it's as much as that's the joke and that's a stereotype. One of the best things I've found, whether it's my wife or friends or anything, is hey, do you want me to just roast this guy that was mean to you, or do you want me to give you actual advice, or you just want me to smile and listen to you? And it's there's all these different options. Which one do you actually need right now? And being honest with that, there's a lot to be said there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're learning that early, Cam. I'm impressed. You're on a good trajectory for a young man. because a lot of people
I'm trying.
and still don't know this, like it is, like, and that's one thing too to point out is to know your partner, to communicate, because we're all different and we all have different things that bring us happiness, irritate us, and I said to my fiance, I said, look, we are going to irritate each other sometimes. This is when we first started dating. This is reality. You're going to irritate me. I'm going to irritate you. But we need to talk about that and choose our battles, because not everything's worth talking about, but you've got to be proactive. Like, that we need to modify this or make a compromise, or, easier said than done many times. But I think that that's key in relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship, a business colleague, or a friend. Like, how can we work together to bring our best selves forward? And what are your strengths? What are, like, Liz is very tech savvy, whereas I'm not. And so, we have different strengths and weaknesses, but we have to realize, like, hey, who can shine in this arena?
And that would be the second major announcement during the show. Your fiance.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's quite funny because I was 49 when we started dating, right?
In the middle of COVID.
Yeah, we're a COVID couple. April 2020. And I'd never even lived with a man romantically. I had housemates that were men. And I was like, wow, I'm a late bloomer, I guess, but it's well worth the wait. He's a great man, and you just never know in life. I think I was a bridesmaid in 20. He was joking with me. He's like, "Are you going to be in 27 weddings?" And but I've been in like 20 weddings, a bridesmaid. I have to count like over like 20. So it's been, and I was like, I've always felt like, hey, when's it going to happen for me? But I feel thankful for waiting. Mm-hmm.
As you should. The right thing comes along, because when you look for what's right, when you know what's right, then you find it. I think there's a, what we were talking about earlier in that mindset. If I look for anger, I find anger. If I look for happiness, I find happiness. I mean, it's oversimplified, but in the end, it's that simple, which is the irony of it. And I'd love for both of you to just touch on that thought again of, well, how do I find that happiness?
Well, I want to share with you one thing. So when I was in my 30s, I wrote a list of everything that I wanted in a partner. I made a list of what I wanted, and he literally has 32 out of 34 things. I'm like, wow. I was like, okay, and because that's what you're putting out there, what you're looking for. And I think that is key, and also as far as, what you were saying, as far as being conscious of looking for what you want in life and being conscious of what you want in life. Because many people are like, I don't know what brings me happiness. You ask people and I'm like, how do you not know this? I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
When I think it's what lights you up, right? Like what makes you feel like excited about something, or like energetically, you just feel lighter and brighter.
And alive.
When something makes you happy, right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing I keep thinking back to, of the idea of, trying to think about, whether these things make you happy or not. I think that's such an interesting thing, because it's, again, kind of goes back to what we were saying, like it almost only exists in the macro of like, you feel it, you get that feeling, but then it goes back to our first conversation today, but it goes back to, it's hard to describe that, it's hard to describe what happiness is, even in some ways. You talk about feeling lighter and these things that you feel, but it's a little bit hard sometimes to imagine. And I think that's such an interesting aspect of it, and taking that to a point where you are focusing on the right things, and not just asking yourself the too deep questions of am I happy and those kind of things, but looking for just that feeling a little bit lighter, and then trying to replicate that in the day. I think it's such a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. Marie Kondo, the woman that wrote about sparking joy, and she's all about like getting rid of stuff, but really like read her book, and she's more about like, does this whatever, this a greeting card from 20 years ago, or, a certain object, does it bring me joy in this moment? And if you go like, well, it did, but now I don't really need it anymore, then you graciously release it to the next person or whatever, right? So when you lose your suitcases and you go to Europe and you go to visit a family that your daughter stayed with for a summer, and when she went there, she was like, can I please they didn't have air conditioning, it was super hot. She's like, can I please get some ice? And she was like desperate for ice. Well, we went and visited the family 2 years later. It was hot still. And they don't have an ice maker. They don't use ice, but they had made us ice in the little egg cups, because we had cocktails. Where they were like, oh, we made these for you. And Sydney and I both were like, oh, we aren't really missing ice anymore. Like these things that and they were trying to do something kind. And so we were like, oh, thank you so much, but like the ice seemed like when you don't have it, you think you want it. And then when you have it, you're like, oh, maybe I don't need this anymore, And so reflecting on like what lights you up, what brings you joy, and it maybe used to bring you joy, but maybe now it doesn't, So just that, it all comes down to that present moment, doesn't it? Like, is it bringing me joy now? How about now? How about now? No? Okay. And I don't think, like you were saying, like, I don't think you need to be like assessing, like literally like, am I happy now? Am I happy now? But like,
how happy am I right now? Am I happy enough?
Well, and it's not a constant thing. So it's sort of like, maybe it's at the end of the day, maybe it's at the end of the week, maybe it's at the end of the year. You're like, did this bring me happiness? I've known Cyrina before, probably when she made the list, before she met her now fiance. And this is the second friend I've had that's managed to meet a German man. And like, they had their list of what they wanted, and the man couldn't be found in a Joe around the street. And so, there are changes that had to happen. And for that person, that reality to come. And then there's that spark. There's that joy. There's that whatever. And it's not constant because
it's life. Yeah, it's life.
The roller coaster. And my husband and I have been together 25 years now. And it's the magic thing for us is talking about everything. And he likes to put on his Superman cape and save the day. And I have to do that. Like, I don't need you to fix this. I just need you to let me empty my bucket so I can get on, similar to the crying. Like, let me just get these words out and then I can move on.
That's a great point in that understanding and reflecting and in my reflecting of what I learned. I already gave it away because I think it's I'll call it ironic. I mean, the guys in the unit now are doing mindfulness training. We were not doing that when I was in the unit. But the fact that it's not just in the unit, it starts at the very beginning of basic training. The first time that young soldier learns how to shoot and the breathing that goes along with that. And, every time I'm out hunting, I still do it. It is just ingrained into that methodology of how I shoot, and that breathing and how that is, it's shooting, but no, it's really the basis of it is the mindfulness and how it calms the body down. So that's what I learned today. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
I would just want to add there that, and I think this is true for a bunch of the kind of like woo-woo things like that, even if it seems like a cliche, even if it seems weird, there's a reason that people do it all the time. Like there's a reason that even if they didn't know what that is, Dad, that they were teaching you to do that because it works, right? And so being able to understand that mechanism, I think, is always an interesting thing there. But no, for me, what I learned, I thought it was really interesting. The 50% of happiness being genetic. It's so obvious when you start to think about it like that, just how much, we inherit and, how much comes from that. I'm sure that also gets into I'm sure there's some nature nurture components that get into that of how much is genetic versus I guess that was the environmental part you're talking about. Sorry, talked myself out of that one. But anyway, just the idea of, how much of it's genetic. And I think that the really interesting thing there is to just using that as like the learning opportunity for yourself is always an interesting thing. That same buddy I was talking with yesterday that I mentioned earlier, there was some point in the conversation we were talking about, me having a kid, and if I felt like I was ready and all this kind of stuff. And at some point in it, I was like, oh, this is the Green Beret in me. Whatever I got from him, I'm like, I've got to build the shed, and I've got to do this, and it's like very action oriented and preparation, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's what that is. Like it looks different. I'm applying it in a very different way, but it's like, oh, I definitely got this from there. And so I think whether it's just the happiness or different behaviors, all that kind of stuff, it's always interesting to try to connect those dots because it helps you understand yourself.
Awesome. Cyrina, how about you? What'd you learn?
I would say I actually really liked when you shared with us, Otis, about when you were 18 and learning how to shoot and making that connection now, how many years later. And also, like, I think that learning about educating people at a younger age, and that's I think to me, really important for people to know, hey, this is going to help me, and it's not woo-woo. And I love your perspective. I love learning about your perspective when you're 18, and now years later you learn about that connection. I love learning that.
Thanks. Liz, how about you?
Well, I learned that Cam has a daughter on the way. That's exciting.
Congratulations.
Super awesome.
Oh,
exciting. But I also learned that Cyrina and I need to be conscious about how we talk about happiness, because when you were talking about that the gap between am I happy now or am I not happy, and like realizing that's a part of a way to teach about it is being conscious of that. Like, well, how often do I need to check in? Am I happy now? Or, so that was a good kind of a light bulb moment for me. Thanks so much.
Awesome. How do folks catch up with y'all, see what y'all got going on next, and sign up for some happiness?
Well, the easiest way is probably to go to our website, which is sustainablehappiness.together.com. And from there, if you want to hire us as speakers, or you want to look into our online programming, or bring us in and to support your team and learning how to breathe better and have less anxiety and more focus and more calm, you can find all that on our website. And then we also have the socials, but we're taking a break right now so that we can be more present with our loved ones.
Yeah. And I will say too, on the going back to having children, Liz and I are very focused on a course we created for young children called Lessons with the Bright Butterfly, because we really want to empower them to have a strong foundation at a young age. I think that, if you have these tools at a younger age, you're able to deal with your emotions better and hopefully not turn to things to help your emotions. Because being a pharmacist, you saw a lot of people turn to drugs, alcohol, and not know how to deal with their emotions. And so we really are very passionate about helping the young children, ages 3 to 8, and really wanting to give them that strong foundation.
Yeah, so if you're listening and you're a teacher or a parent, you can find that on our website as well. Just go to online education. And it's easy to implement because they're just short videos that you play, and it's for ages 3 to 8. So if you're interested, we'd love to hear what you think of it and how it went for you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. It's
Thank
great
you.
that we finally
Thanks
got
for having
caught
us.
up.
Yeah, thank you. We're happy to be here today.
All right, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Dr. Cyrina Bullard and Liz Rutledge, for joining us today. Sorry, I don't know why I stepped over Bullard like that. Remember, you can watch clips of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass it along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.